Maya had her face pressed against the cold gallery glass at 11:48 p.m. with a delivery bag cutting into her shoulder and exactly 6 minutes before her next drop-off. She wasn't being dramatic about it. She wasn't posing or sighing or doing any of the things people did in movies when they stood outside places they couldn't afford to enter. She was just trying to see a painting hung near the back wall under a single spotlight, and the reflection on the glass kept getting in the way, so she leaned closer. The painting was of a woman mid-stride, one arm reaching forward, her face turned away from the viewer. She was going somewhere. She was late for it. And whoever painted her understood something true about the particular exhaustion of women who are always in motion, that it isn't weakness, it's just the cost of wanting things in a world that doesn't make wanting easy. Maya looked at it for 12 seconds. She counted without meaning to. Then her phone buzzed. She straightened up, adjusted the bag strap that had been slowly carving a groove into her collarbone since noon, and she ran. Her name was Maya Ellison. She was 26 years old with $17 in her bank account, 3 jobs, and one dream she visited through closed windows at midnight. She had not painted anything she was proud of in 8 months. She had not slept more than 5 hours in longer than she could honestly remember. She had not thought about love. Not seriously, not with any real intention behind it, in 2 years. Not because she didn't want it, but because want was a luxury, and Maya Ellison had learned very early that luxuries were the first things to go when survival became the primary occupation. Her alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. in an apartment that was small but not sad. One window. Good light in the mornings that she was never properly awake to appreciate. On her nightstand sat a cold cup of coffee she'd made at midnight and forgotten about. A sketchbook splayed open to a half-finished drawing of hands. She was always drawing hands, she didn't know why, and her phone with 3 color-coded schedules on the screen. Green for the cafe, blue for deliveries, red for Yama's table. Her walls were mostly bare. Functional furniture, a second-hand lamp, a kitchen table that she also used as a desk, and an ironing board depending on the day. But on one wall, just above the small second-hand couch, hung a painting. Her painting, bold, slightly reckless with color, alive in the way that things are alive when they're made by someone who means it. A woman standing in a field of red grass under a yellow sky looking at something the viewer couldn't see. Everything else in the apartment was practical and subdued. That painting was the only proof that someone passionate lived there. She got dressed in the dark, the way she always did, moving from memory because turning on lights felt like a commitment to being awake that she wasn't ready to make. She ate half a granola bar over the sink, checked her bank balance out of habit, winced out of habit, put her phone away out of habit. On her way to the door she passed her art supplies, a flat storage box tucked under the bed, organized and untouched for 2 weeks. She paused with her hand on the doorframe, didn't open it, kept moving. The dream was in storage. For now. Here is what those 3 jobs looked like in sequence, because the sequence matters. The cafe opened at 5:15 and Maya was always there at 5:08 because being early was the only form of control she had over her days. She made coffee with the quiet competence of someone who has done a thing so many times that their hands simply know it without requiring much input from the brain. She made beautiful latte art without thinking about it. A leaf, a rosette, a tulip depending on her mood. One morning a customer pointed at the tulip in her cup and said, genuinely delighted, "Did you do that on purpose?" And Maya looked at the foam design and for 1/2 second her face did something soft and unguarded. The face of someone who had forgotten for a moment that she was tired. Then the next order came in and the face went back to its working configuration. The delivery shift started at noon and ran until 5 on the days she had it, which was most days. She drove a second-hand bicycle that she had named Gerald for reasons she couldn't fully explain, and she navigated the city with the focused efficiency of someone who has memorized every shortcut and learned which traffic lights were liars. She delivered in rain, in heat, in the specific misery of a city in late autumn when the wind has personal grievances. She smiled at doormen who looked at her bag like it had offended their ancestors. She said, "Have a good evening," to people who didn't look up from their phones. She ate when she ate while pedaling, which was not recommended but was the only way to eat at all. And then, at 6 in the evening, she walked into Yama's table. She had taken the waitressing job 3 weeks ago when her delivery earnings came up short by $400, and she'd done the math on her life and understood she needed a third income stream, or she was going to start making choices she didn't want to make. The job listing had been handwritten on a card in the window, a detail she'd noticed because she noticed handwriting the way other people noticed music, as a form of character. And she'd gone in and talked to a woman named Mrs. Cho who was small and direct and looked at Maya for approximately 4 seconds before saying, "You work hard. We can see that. Come back Tuesday." Yama's table was warm. Not designed warmth. Not the warmth of restaurants that hired consultants to make them feel cozy, but accumulated warmth, decades of it, the kind that lives in walls and worn wood and the particular smell of a kitchen that has been making the same beloved recipes for a long time. The menus were handwritten and laminated. The chairs didn't match, a fact that should have made the dining room look chaotic, but instead made it look chosen, like someone had walked through the world collecting exactly the seats that made them happy. There was a small potted plant on the windowsill by the corner table, dark green and slightly glossy, and it was the only thing in the restaurant that nobody, not the staff, not the regulars, not the occasional table of strangers, ever moved or touched or even looked at too directly, the way you don't touch certain things in certain places because you understand instinctively that they are not decorative. They are memorial. Mrs. Cho handed her an apron on her first evening and said, "You look terrible." "Thank you, Mrs. Cho. Eat something before the rush." "I'm fine. I didn't ask if you were fine." Maya ate, standing up over the prep counter, a bowl of kimchi jjigae that was so good it briefly reorganized her understanding of what food could be. She barely tasted it because she had 4 tables to set and a side work list that wasn't going to complete itself. But her body registered it the way tired bodies register something genuinely nourishing, with a kind of full system relief like a sigh from the inside out. She was clearing a table at 8:45 that first Sunday when the black car pulled up outside. Nobody reacted loudly, but the restaurant's atmosphere adjusted. It was subtle. Mrs. Cho straightening slightly behind the host's stand, the kitchen moving a fraction faster, a quality of attention entering the room the way weather enters a room when someone opens a window. Maya noticed it the way she noticed everything, cataloged it, filed it, kept moving. The man who walked in wore a charcoal overcoat that fit him with the precision of something made specifically for his body. He was not large in a way that commanded attention. He was contained, which was more unsettling. Everything about him was deliberate. The way he moved without appearing to scan the room and yet had clearly already seen all of it. The way he sat at the corner table. Not relaxed, not tense, just arranged, like something placed with intention. He put his phone face down on the table and did not look at it again. He did not look at the menu. He ordered quietly in Korean. Mrs. Cho took his order personally, which she did not do for other tables. Maya brought his water. He did not look at her the way men usually looked at her, the assessing look, the interested look, the carefully indifferent look. He looked at her the way someone looks at a clock, registering the time, registering that the clock is there, moving on. She returned to the kitchen. He holds his chopsticks like someone taught him young and he never forgot, she thought, without quite meaning to think it. Then she had 4 more tables and a delivery shift tomorrow at noon and she stopped thinking about him entirely. What she didn't see because she was already moving. The way he looked at the chair across from him, the yellow one, slightly too cheerful for the rest of the table, for a long moment before he began to eat. The way he looked at the plant. The way he ate the doenjang jjigae slowly, with the focused attention of someone tasting something they are trying to memorize or trying to remember. She didn't see any of that. She was working. She was always working. She found out about the application at 11:40 p.m. in the back alley, sitting on an overturned crate with her apron off and her feet aching and her phone showing her an email she had been unconsciously avoiding all day. The gallery showcase. The one she'd spent 3 months preparing a portfolio for, fitting it into the margins of her days. Sketch on your break, photograph the work at midnight, write the statement at 2 a.m. Rejected. Not enough portfolio pieces. They wanted 12. She had submitted 7. She read it twice. Didn't cry. Didn't have the energy for it, or maybe the feeling was too complicated for tears, which are simple, and this was not simple. This was the feeling of having tried your genuine best within the genuine limits of your life and having the limits matter more than the trying. She had known this was possible. She had prepared herself for this possibility. The preparation didn't help much. She opened her sketchbook and drew for 11 minutes under the alley light. Fast, pressure-release sketching. The kind she did when her hands needed to move. And when her phone buzzed with tomorrow's delivery schedule notification, she closed the book and stood up. She didn't notice the black car still idling on the street. She didn't notice it until she was almost at the corner, and then she thought it was a coincidence because why wouldn't it be, and she turned and walked to the bus stop and went home. In the car, Shin's voice came through the phone. Sir, the call has been waiting 11 minutes. Kang Jisoo watched until she turned the corner. The street was empty after that, just the ordinary city, ordinary dark. Go ahead, he said. You already know this woman. Maybe you are this woman. 3 jobs. 1 dream. 0 time for anything that isn't survival. She is not waiting to be rescued. She doesn't even know she needs it. And the man who is about to walk into her life doesn't do romance. He does acquisitions. He has dismantled criminal networks with less effort than it is going to take to get Maya Ellison to sit down and eat a full meal. He is going to try to solve her like an efficiency problem. She is going to be the first thing in his entire life that refuses to be solved. Stay with this, because the moment these 2 people truly collide, nothing about either of their lives will ever run on schedule again. 2 weeks passed the way Maya's weeks always passed. In a blur of alarms and apron strings and the particular lower back pain that came from being on your feet for 14 hours at a stretch. She had picked up an extra shift at the cafe to cover the gap left by a coworker who'd called in sick 3 days running, which meant her schedule had gone from punishing to something that didn't have a civilized word for it. She was running on coffee she made herself at cost and 4 hours of sleep and the specific stubborn energy of someone who had decided, somewhere along the line, that stopping was not an available option. She was also, despite everything, sketching. Not properly. Not the focused, intentional work she did in the studio she didn't have yet. The studio that lived in the future like a promissory note she kept renewing. But in the margins of her days, in the 11 minutes behind Iyama's table and on the back of delivery receipts and in the last conscious moments before sleep took her mid-thought. Her hands kept moving even when the rest of her was running on fumes. She'd accepted this about herself years ago. The drawing wasn't a hobby. It was more like breathing, not something she did so much as something that happened to her whether she made space for it or not. She had, without fully acknowledging it, been drawing the same subject repeatedly for the past 2 weeks. A man at a corner table, hands around a bowl, eyes on something just past the frame. She told herself it was a compositional study. She told herself that very firmly and then turned the page. The evening everything changed started ordinarily enough. There was a private booking at Iyama's table, or what appeared to be a private booking. For men who arrived in 2 separate cars and sat at the large round table near the back with the specific arrangement of people who have a hierarchy and are comfortable with it. They ordered without looking at the menus, spoke in low voices, and had the quality that Maya had learned to identify over years of service work as the quality of men who were accustomed to rooms adjusting around them rather than the other way around. She had been on her feet since 5 that morning. The cafe, the deliveries, and now this. When she moved between tables her vision had that slightly soft quality that came with deep exhaustion. Not blurring exactly, more like the world had turned the sharpness down a notch. She was managing. She was always managing. The tray held 4 cups and a cast iron pot of barley tea, and she was moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who knew their hands weren't entirely steady and was compensating with concentration. She rounded the corner of the large table. The delivery bag strap, the one from her afternoon shift that she had, in her tiredness, forgotten to take off, caught the corner of a chair. The tray tipped. The tea went across the sleeve of the man at the near end of the table, hot enough to matter, spreading dark across pale, expensive fabric. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. The man stood slowly. He was not large, but he rose with the particular deliberateness of someone for whom standing up was a statement. He looked at his sleeve. He looked at Maya. His expression did not change, and that was somehow worse than if it had. "I'm so sorry," Maya began. "Lim SSI. 1 word. From the corner table. Quiet, the way very certain things are quiet. Not because they lack force but because force is not the point. The point was the certainty." The man called Lim looked toward the corner. Something passed through his expression. Not fear exactly, but the recalibration of a man who has just remembered where he is and who else is in the room. He sat back down. Maya stood very still with the empty tray in her hands. Jisoo was looking at her. Not with the clock look she'd registered before, the registering and moving on look. He was looking at her the way he had looked at the painting his mother left on the wall, which she had noticed from across the room without knowing why she was noticing it. With attention. with something that was trying to determine what it was dealing with. "Bring him a fresh pot," he said. "Then come here." She wanted to say something pointed about not being his to direct. She wanted to say that she had 4 other tables and a manager and an actual chain of command that did not include him. She said, "Of course," because Mrs. Cho was watching from the host stand with an expression that communicated several things simultaneously, the clearest of which was, "Please just do what he says." She brought the tea. She walked to the corner table. He gestured at the chair across from him, the yellow one, the cheerful mismatched one, without looking up from the document he was reviewing. She sat down because her feet chose sitting down before the rest of her could object. "How many hours today?" It was not phrased as a question. It had the structure of a question but the delivery of someone gathering data. "That's not really. How many hours?" She looked at him. He was still reading the document. The question had apparently not required eye contact. 14, she said. "Why?" He set the document down. Now he looked at her. "You're operating at a dangerous deficit. Your hands aren't steady. That's why the accident happened. So it's my fault." "It's not a fault. It's math. Input below the functional threshold produces degraded output. You're below threshold. I'll keep that in mind." "You won't," he said, with the calm certainty of someone who has studied patterns extensively. "People who work like you do have decided that the threshold doesn't apply to them. They believe the belief hard enough that it works until it doesn't." Maya looked at him for a moment. That's very philosophical for someone who just witnessed a tea spill. Something moved through his expression. Not a smile, it didn't get that far. But the possibility of one, briefly, like a door opening and then being professionally closed again. "Go finish your shift," he said. He picked up the document again. "And take the bag off. You're not delivering anything right now." She looked down at the delivery bag still strapped across her body. She had genuinely forgotten it was there. The absurdity of this, the specific, exhausted absurdity of being so tired you forget you're wearing things, hit her somewhere in the chest, and she wanted very badly to laugh and also to put her head down on the stranger's table and sleep for 11 hours. She did neither. She stood up, took the bag off, and went back to work. She noticed, as she moved through the rest of the evening, that the men at the large round table were considerably more careful around her after that. They moved their elbows when she approached. One of them refilled his own water rather than wait for her to come by. Small adjustments, made quietly, by men who had apparently received a wordless communication she hadn't been party to. She thought about this on the bus home. She thought about the one word that had sat a man back down in his chair. She thought about a question phrased without a question mark, delivered across a restaurant by a man sitting at a corner table on a Sunday evening, eating alone, looking at a plant. She did not think about how it had felt to have someone notice she was past her limit. She made a specific, deliberate choice not to think about that. It didn't work. She found out who he was 3 days later. One of the other waitstaff. A young woman who had been at Iyama's table for 2 years and navigated its particular atmosphere with the ease of someone who had long since made their peace with what the restaurant was and who moved through it. Mentioned it in the context of answering a question Maya hadn't quite asked. They were rolling silverware before the evening rush, and Maya had said something vague about the regular at the corner table, and the other woman had looked at her with an expression that was not unkind but was very careful. "You really don't know," the woman said. "Know what?" The woman put down the silverware. She said a name. She said it the way you say the name of a weather system, not dramatically, just as information that has practical implications for your day. Maya went home that night and did what she would have told anyone else was a bad idea. She researched, methodically, at her laptop at 2 in the morning, with her delivery bag still on the floor and her sketchbook open beside her because she thought better with something to draw on. Search results that led to other search results. Names and structures and the particular kind of information that lives in the spaces between official records. She was not afraid. That surprised her, and then she sat with the surprise and understood it. She was not afraid because afraid would have meant he was something outside her experience, a foreign category. But the man she had observed across 14 Sunday-adjacent evenings was the man who had sent a dangerous associate back to his chair with one word to protect a waitress who'd spilled tea. The man who ate alone at a corner table and never moved the plant. The man who looked at a handwritten menu with the expression of someone reading a letter. Complicated, she thought. Not outside her experience. Just complicated. She went to Mrs. Cho the following Sunday afternoon, before her shift, and sat across from the older woman during the quiet hour when the restaurant belonged only to its staff. She asked about the owner. Mrs. Cho looked at her for a long moment with the measuring look that Maya had come to understand meant she was deciding not how much to say but in what order to say it. She told Maya about a woman who had worked 3 jobs, 3 specific, demanding, badly paid jobs, to save enough money to lease a failing restaurant space in a neighborhood that nobody had believed in yet. Who had built the menu by cooking for neighbors first and asking what they wanted. Who had bought furniture from wherever she found pieces that made her happy, which was why the chairs didn't match and why that had never been a problem. Who had brought the plant from her apartment because she said a room where people ate should have something living in it. Who had, in the last years of her life, run the restaurant that had become the neighborhood's living room, the place for birthdays and breakups and the specific Sunday loneliness that a bowl of good soup can address when nothing else can. Who had a son who came every Sunday without fail. Who had never changed a single thing in the restaurant after she was gone. Not the menus, not the chairs, not the plant. He is a frightening man, Mrs. Cho said, in the tone of someone stating a fact that has coexisted peacefully with other facts for a long time. But in this room, he is only ever her son. Maya looked at the corner table. She looked at the plant on the windowsill, dark green and slightly glossy, tilted almost imperceptibly toward the light. She took out her sketchbook and drew it before she put her apron on. Just a small study, the shape of the leaves, the ceramic pot, the way the light came through the window at that angle in the late afternoon. She didn't know why she was drawing it. She didn't examine the impulse. She just drew it and went to work. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon while she was on her bicycle between deliveries. She felt her phone buzz in her pocket and assumed it was the dispatch system rerouting her. She checked it at a red light. The subject line was from her art school's financial portal. She opened it because she was expecting a payment reminder. She had a balance she'd been managing in installments, stretching it out, keeping the account active because losing the student portal access meant losing her archived coursework and her instructor feedback going back 4 years. Outstanding balance, $0. Payment received in full. She read it 4 times at a red light that had turned green. A car behind her honked. She pedaled through the intersection and pulled over on the other side and read it 4 more times. She called the school's financial office from the curb. Yes, the balance had been cleared. No, they couldn't disclose the source of the payment. No, it could not be reversed. It had been processed as a donation designated to her account specifically. Yes, they were sure. She sat on Gerald the bicycle on a city curb in the middle of a delivery shift and looked at her phone screen. $17 in her bank account and a 0 balance on a debt that had been a low-grade weight on her chest for 2 years. She should have felt relieved. She felt something more like vertigo, the dizzying sensation of a pressure you've been compensating for so long that its sudden removal leaves you briefly unable to calibrate your own balance. She called Mrs. Cho. "Eat something, Maya," Mrs. Cho said, before Maya had said anything except hello. "Mrs. Cho, I said eat something. Did you know about this?" A pause. "Eat something," Mrs. Cho said, and hung up. Maya sat on the curb for another minute. The city moved around her with its ordinary indifference. She thought about 14-hour days and a woman who had built a restaurant from 3 jobs and mismatched chairs and a plant from her own apartment. She thought about a man who had asked how many hours with the tone of someone for whom the answer was already unacceptable before she gave it. "He doesn't even know me," she thought. And then, more quietly, like something she was admitting to herself rather than deciding, except that he does. He knows something. He's been paying the kind of attention that knows something. She put her phone away. She had 3 more deliveries and then a shift at Yama's table, and tomorrow was another 14 hours and the day after that was the same. Nothing about her life had changed. Except the 0. The 0 had changed. She didn't know yet whether to be grateful or furious. She suspected, with the instinct of someone who had learned to read the shape of her own feelings before they fully arrived, that she was going to end up being both. He was waiting outside Yama's table when her shift ended. Not pacing. Not checking his phone. Just standing beside his car in the specific stillness that Maya had come to understand was not patience. Patient people waited while managing their impatience. This was something else. This was a man for whom stillness was simply the default state when there was nothing currently requiring motion. He stood the way expensive buildings stood. Like the space around him had organized itself accordingly. Maya stopped walking when she saw him. She had her apron folded over her arm and her sketchbook under her elbow, and the particular exhausted dignity of someone who has been on their feet for 11 hours and is not going to let that show any more than it already does. She looked at him for a moment. Then she walked the rest of the way to where he was standing because stopping in the middle of the street was not going to make the conversation happen any faster or slower. "You paid my tuition," she said. "Yes. Without asking me. Asking would have given you the opportunity to say no." She looked at him. The night was cold and his breath made small clouds in the air between them, and he seemed entirely unbothered by the temperature, which was irritating in the way that all forms of composure are irritating when you yourself are not composed. "That is exactly the problem," she said. "That is the whole problem in one sentence, and I don't think you understand that. I understand that you're angry. I'm not angry yet. I'm at the stage before angry where I'm trying to understand what you think you were doing." "I was removing an obstacle," he said, with the straightforward delivery of someone who genuinely did not understand why this required further explanation. "It wasn't your obstacle to remove. It was debt accruing interest on a schedule that would have taken you 4 years to clear at your current payment rate. 4 years during which the debt would have continued to function as a reason to work at the expense of the work that actually matters." He said this the way he said everything, without emphasis, without apology, just information presented in its logical sequence. "I removed it. The timeline for your actual goals is now shorter. That's the calculation." Maya breathed in through her nose. "I am a person," she said, "not a calculation." Something shifted in his expression. Barely perceptible, the way a shift in air pressure is barely perceptible before it becomes weather. He said nothing. She pulled her coat tighter. "What else are you planning to do?" He reached into his jacket and produced a key. He held it out to her on a flat palm, the way you offer something to an animal you're not sure will take it, without pressure, without closing the hand. "There's a studio," he said. "North-facing windows. Professional lighting. 6 months. Fully resourced. The lease is paid." She looked at the key. She did not take it. "And what do you want from me in exchange?" "A result." "Define result." "A legitimate gallery placement. 1 piece, 1 gallery by the end of 6 months. Not a pop-up. Not a favor from someone who knows my name. A real placement, earned on the merit of the work." He paused. "If you achieve it, the studio continues for as long as you want it. If you don't, you acknowledge that the 3-job approach was not the path to the goal." "And if I don't acknowledge that?" "You will," he said, with the absolute calm of someone who has never been wrong about a calculation and doesn't expect to start now. "Because you're honest. It's one of the inefficient things about you." She almost said something sharp about what he could do with his assessment of her inefficiencies. She looked at the key instead. She thought about the north-facing windows he had mentioned, the particular quality of north-facing light which was even and unforgiving and exactly what she needed. She thought about the studio she'd been sketching in her head for 2 years, the space she'd see whenever she closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to have enough room and enough time and enough light to find out what she was actually capable of. She thought about her mother, who had worked herself to a standstill for 30 years and never found out what she might have made of herself if the circumstances had bent even slightly in her direction. "The work is mine," she said. "Every piece. You don't commission, you don't direct, you don't suggest, you don't walk in and rearrange the world so that the outcomes are ones you've already decided on." "Agreed. You stay out of my process." "Agreed. You can't agree that fast. You don't even know what my process looks like." He looked at her with the focused attention he brought to everything. "I know it currently involves bad lighting and granola bars eaten over a sink at 5 in the morning. Anything is an improvement on the existing conditions." The silence stretched between them. It was cold and the street was quiet, and somewhere a few blocks away a car alarm cycled through its indifferent song. Maya looked at the key in his palm. She thought about the email with the 0 balance. She thought about the plant on the windowsill and a woman who had built something real from nothing and a son who ate alone every Sunday to keep her memory from going quiet. "I hate this," she said. It was honest. It was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks. "I know," he said. This doesn't make us even. This isn't something I can pay back, and I want you to know that I know that, and that it bothers me considerably. It's not a debt. Then what is it? He was quiet for a moment. Just one. It's a correction, he said. The system was wrong. I corrected it. She took the key. She told herself it was because of the north-facing light. She repeated this several times on the bus home and once more before she fell asleep, and she mostly believed it. What followed were the best weeks she'd had in years, and she would remember them later with the specific bittersweetness of knowing exactly when a good thing was happening while you were in it. The studio was on the 4th floor of a building with enormous windows that filled the space with the kind of clean, even light that made colors honest. It had high ceilings and a concrete floor that was already paint-stained from previous occupants, which meant she didn't have to be careful about it, which meant she could work without protecting anything, which turned out to matter more than she'd expected. There were professional lights for evenings. There was a supply cabinet that she opened on her first morning and stood in front of for a full minute without touching anything, just looking, because it was stocked with everything she had ever made do without, and she needed a moment to understand it was real. She painted, really painted, the way she had not painted in 2 years, the way she had been painting in her head during all the hours her body had been doing other things. Ideas she'd been too tired to reach came back to her like they'd been waiting just outside the door, patient and slightly reproachful. She worked in long stretches and forgot to eat and had to set alarms to remind herself that her body required maintenance. She made things she didn't fully understand until they were finished. She made things she understood completely and then made them more complicated because completeness felt like stopping and she wasn't ready to stop. The series was called In Her Head, Women in Motion. Figures caught mid-gesture, mid-stride, mid-reach. Every figure had something unresolved. A face turned away, a hand extended towards something outside the frame, a body in the process of becoming rather than the state of having arrived. They were painted with the loose, confident brushwork of someone who has stopped being careful and started being true. They were the best things she had ever made, and she knew it the way you know things that are actually true, without the usual self-negotiation and qualification. Jisoo appeared at the studio twice in the first month. Both times he knocked. Both times he stood in the doorway for a moment, registering that she was there, registering the work in progress, not commenting, and then left. The second time he sent his second-in-command, a serious young man named Shin, who arrived with containers of food from Yama's table and the expression of someone who had been given an assignment that fell outside his professional comfort zone. He set the containers down on the workbench with great precision and said, "Mr. Kong asks that you eat something," and left before she could respond. She ate the food. She wasn't going to waste food from Yama's table on a point of pride. She also, in a quiet hour on a rainy afternoon when the light was flat and her eyes needed a break from the canvas she'd been fighting with, painted the plant from memory. The one from the restaurant windowsill. It was a small study, 8 by 10 inches on a piece of paper tacked to the wall, quick and observational, the kind of sketch that was more about looking than about making. She put it in the corner of the studio and more or less forgot about it. The pop-up show was arranged through a community arts space 2 blocks from her apartment. A legitimate venue, a real open call, 40 people on a Saturday evening with cheap wine and the specific electric nervousness of an artist putting work on a public wall for the first time in a long time. She hung 8 pieces. She had never hung 8 pieces anywhere. She stood back and looked at them on the white walls and felt something she hadn't felt in so long it took her a moment to identify it. Pride. Clean and uncomplicated. Just pride. She sold 6 pieces by 9 p.m. She stood at the edge of the room after the last sale and felt the particular elation of work that has found people who needed it. The specific confirmation that she was not making things only for herself, that the conversation she was trying to start with her paintings was one that other people wanted to have. She wanted to call someone. She wanted to share it with someone. She opened her contacts and scrolled and noticed, with a small shock of clarity, that the person she most wanted to tell was someone whose number she didn't have. She went home. She slept for 8 hours for the first time in months. She woke up the next morning and made coffee and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop intending to look at gallery submission deadlines. Instead, she cross-referenced buyers' names. She was not sure what made her do it. Some instinct, some thread of unease that she hadn't consciously registered during the elation of the evening, surfacing now in the sober morning. She had 4 buyers' full names from the payment confirmations. She recognized 2 of them immediately. The third she found after 10 minutes of searching. The fourth took 20 and a different search approach. 4 of her 6 sales connected in ways that ranged from direct to adjacent to Kang Jisoo. She sat with this for a full day. She went to the studio and stood in front of her canvases and did not paint. She walked to the window and looked out at the city and felt something she hadn't expected to feel on the day after the best professional moment of her life, which was the particular vertigo of not knowing if the moment had been real. Am I good, she thought, or am I just something he's decided to believe in? The distinction mattered enormously. The distinction was, in some ways, everything. She went to him the following evening. He was at Yama's table. Not his usual Sunday, a Wednesday, which meant something had brought him there outside his schedule. He was at the corner table with documents spread in front of him and a cup of tea he hadn't touched, and the focused, closed-off expression of someone doing the kind of work that requires all available bandwidth. She sat down across from him without being invited. He looked up. Am I good? She said. No preamble. No working up to it. Not as a charitable assessment. Not as a conclusion you've reached because you've decided to support me. Am I actually good? He looked at her. He did not look at the documents. The work has value, he said. That's not what I asked you. The response to the pop-up. Jisoo. His name in her mouth, for the first time, landed differently than she expected. He went very still. 4 of my 6 buyers have connections to you. I checked. So I'm asking you again, without the performance of an answer, to tell me if you think I'm talented or if I am something you've collected the way you collect everything else. Because the difference matters to me more than any studio or any cleared debt or any. She stopped. Breathed. It matters more than any of it. Tell me the truth. The silence was long enough to be its own answer. She watched him, watched the careful management of his expression, the discipline of a man who had trained himself to give nothing away, and she saw, in the gap between what he said next and when he said it, the honest thing. I don't know, he said finally. Came out quietly, like it cost something. I have never known how to evaluate things that matter to me. Everything I care about, I surround with protection. Sometimes the protection is indistinguishable from control. He paused. I didn't intend for the buyers to be people connected to me. I intended for you to sell. The outcome appeared the same from the outside. It is not the same. I understand that now. If I can't sell to strangers who don't know your name, she said, then I need to know that. I need to know if I can stand on my own or if I'm standing on a foundation you built and I can't see the difference anymore. You're standing on your own. Then let me prove it. No more managed outcomes. No more protective acquisitions. If someone buys my work, it's because they want the work. Not because you want them to want it. He held her gaze. Something in him was doing something complicated and quiet, and she didn't have a name for it yet. Understood, he said. She stood up. She was at the door before he spoke again. It was real, he said. She turned. He was looking at the table, not at her. The pop-up was real. The response was real. The work is, he stopped. Started again. I've sat in rooms with people who make things my whole life. Nobody has ever made me want to stop and look the way your work does. That's not a managed outcome. That's not protection. He picked up his pen. He looked back at his documents. That's the truth. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She didn't thank him. She left. She walked to the bus stop in the cold and sat on the bench and opened her sketchbook and drew his hands around a teacup and sat with the specific complicated feeling of someone who has just received the thing they asked for and discovered it was both more and less than they expected. Somewhere in the middle of that drawing, she understood she was in a considerable amount of trouble. She went back to 2 jobs the following week. She told herself it was about principle. She told herself it with the conviction of someone who has made a decision they fully intend to stand behind. Repeated it on the bus to her morning cafe shift. Repeated it while making lattes she didn't taste. Repeated it on Gerald through the afternoon rain until it had the worn quality of a thing said too many times to still be entirely true. The real answer was simpler and more uncomfortable. She had walked out of Yama's table 3 nights ago, having received exactly the honest answer she demanded. And the honest answer had not resolved anything. It had just made everything more complicated in a way that required distance to think through. And the only way Maya knew how to create distance was to fill the space with work, which was also the thing that had gotten her into this situation to begin with, but self-awareness and self-correction were not always the same skill. She did not go to the studio for 4 days. On the 5th day she went, not because she'd resolved anything but because staying away was starting to feel less like a principled stand and more like punishing herself for someone else's mistake, which was a pattern she recognized and had no interest in repeating. She let herself in with her key. She stood in the middle of the space with the north-facing light coming through the windows at the particular angle it had in the late morning. The honest, even light that didn't flatter anything and didn't need to. She looked at the canvases on the wall. The Women in Motion series, 8 pieces in various stages, the best work of her life arranged in a rough arc around the room. She looked at them for a long time without touching anything. Then she picked up a brush and she went back to work. She painted differently now. Not worse. If anything, the work that came out of that week had a rawness to it, an emotional temperature that the earlier pieces in the series had been building toward without quite reaching. She painted a figure standing in the middle of a room full of open doors, not moving toward any of them. She painted a pair of hands holding something that wasn't there. She painted, without fully deciding to, a woman sitting at a corner table in a restaurant full of mismatched chairs, looking at a man across the room who didn't know she was looking. She turned that one to the wall before the paint was dry. Then she turned it back around. Then she left it facing out and went home. She was sketching during her break behind the cafe, a habit so ingrained at this point that her hands reached for the sketchbook before she'd consciously decided to draw anything, when she realized she'd been drawing the same face for 20 minutes. Not the composed public face. The Sunday face. The face he had at the corner table when he thought nobody was watching, which was softer and more tired and more human than anything he showed the rest of the world. She looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she flipped to a fresh page and started drawing something else, and didn't look at the sketch again, and thought about it for the rest of the shift. He came to the studio on a Thursday. He knocked the way he always knocked. 2 precise knocks, not tentative, not demanding, just announcing. She called out that the door was open and kept working, because she was in the middle of something that couldn't stop, and she'd decided weeks ago that the studio was her space and the terms of entry were hers to set. He came in. She heard him stop just inside the door. She heard the particular quality of silence that meant he was looking at the work, the new pieces she'd added to the wall since the last time he'd been here. "You've been busy," he said. "That's generally what the studio is for." She finished the passage she was working on and stepped back, cleaning her brush without turning around. She could see him in her peripheral vision, overcoat, no watch, which she had catalogued by now as meaningful. He wore the watch when he was working. He didn't wear it when he was somewhere he'd chosen to be for reasons that weren't strategic. She had not told him she'd noticed this. "The new pieces are different," he said. "Different how?" "More exposed." He said it carefully, like he understood it was a word that required care. "The earlier work was about motion. These are about stopping. About being seen mid-stop." She turned around then. He was standing in front of the canvas she'd almost turned to the wall, the woman at the corner table, the man across the room. He was looking at it with the expression he brought to things he was trying to understand completely before he said anything about them. "That's a perceptive reading," she said, and kept her voice level. He looked at her, then back at the painting. "She's looking at someone who doesn't know he's being watched." "Yes." The man across the room. He was quiet for a moment. "He looks like he's somewhere else in his head. Somewhere he only goes when he thinks he's alone." "Yes." Another silence. He turned from the painting to her, and his expression had the quality it got when he had arrived at a conclusion he hadn't expected. "You've been drawing me for a while," he said. It was not an accusation. It was the delivery of a man who has just understood a set of data points that were available all along. She held his gaze. Since the 2nd week, something happened in his face. The careful management he maintained over his expressions, the professional composure that she had watched him deploy like armor for months, did not exactly fall, but it shifted, the way a very controlled thing shifts when something unexpected passes through it. He looked, for a moment, genuinely undone. Not distressed, just reached. Like someone had put their hand through the glass, he stood behind and touched the actual person. "Why?" he said, quietly. "Because you're interesting," she said. "Not the way the world finds you interesting. The way you are on Sundays. When you're just her son." He said nothing for a long time. The studio was quiet around them, the late afternoon light moving slowly across the concrete floor, the smell of oil paint and turpentine that Maya had come to associate with the feeling of being most fully herself. "My mother would have liked you," he said finally. He said it the way people say true things that cost them something, not looking at her, looking at the painting. She liked people who paid attention. She said most people look, but they don't actually see. She thought it was the most important skill a person could have. Maya set her brush down. She was right. She was right about most things. Pause. She was wrong about the jjigae. Mrs. Cho told me she made it too salty for 20 years and nobody said anything because they loved her. It surprised a laugh out of Maya. Real and unguarded. The kind she didn't produce on purpose. He looked at her when she laughed, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Like something he'd been holding at a careful distance had gotten closer without him authorizing it, and he wasn't sure yet whether to mind. "I like that story," she said. "She would have told it better." "I know. Tell me anyway," he told her. Standing in her studio in the late afternoon light, hands in his pockets, in the plain dark jacket without the watch, he told her about his mother the way you tell stories about people you carry with you everywhere, with the specific detail of someone who has gone over the material enough times to have memorized it but is still, somehow, discovering things in it. The market where she bought the chairs. The argument she'd had with the landlord when she first leased the space, which she had apparently won through the application of sheer immovable certainty without raising her voice once. The Sunday ritual she'd established and that he had continued without them ever discussing that he would. It had simply been obvious, the way certain things between certain people are simply obvious without requiring language. Maya listened. She did not draw while he talked, which was unusual for her, because she usually drew to process. But this didn't need processing. It just needed to be heard. When he stopped talking, the room was darker, the light having shifted into the softer register of early evening, and they had both migrated without noticing it from standing at opposite ends of the studio to sitting on the paint-splattered workbench. Not quite close enough to be touching, close enough to hear each other breathe. "You never changed anything," she said. "In the restaurant. Not one thing." "No. Why not?" He considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all questions, which she had come to understand was not performance but was simply how he engaged with things that mattered. "Because changing things would have meant admitting she wasn't coming back," he said. "And I knew she wasn't coming back. I'm not sentimental about facts. But knowing something and accepting it are different operations, and the restaurant was where I was still, running the other operation." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me." "I'm generally honest. You're generally precise. It's not the same thing." He looked at her. Something in him was very still. "No," he said. "It isn't." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than they'd had before. Not the silence of two people who don't know what to say. The silence of two people who know exactly what could be said and are each waiting to understand whether this is the moment to say it. It wasn't. Not yet. But it was close enough to the moment that they could both feel its shape. He stood up. He looked at the painting of the woman at the corner table one more time. "The next time you paint me," he said, "I'd like to know. Why? So I can be still on purpose." He looked at her. "You said I'm only still on Sundays. I'd like to try being still on a different day." She held his gaze and felt the specific complicated feeling of something she'd been managing at arm's length, getting through her defenses by the simple, disarming method of being honest. "I'll let you know," she said. He left. She sat on the workbench in the darkening studio for a few minutes after the door closed, just breathing, just being in the room with what had shifted between them and hadn't been named yet and didn't need to be named yet. Then she got up, turned on the professional lights, and went back to work. She painted for 4 more hours, and everything she made was better than anything she'd made before. She didn't question why. She just let it happen. The gallery inquiry arrived on a Monday morning, a real one, from a curator at a respected gallery who had attended the pop-up show as a guest of someone else and had not known whose work she was looking at until she'd already stood in front of the same piece for 11 minutes. The email was professional and specific, which were the two qualities Maya had learned to look for in legitimate interest as opposed to polite interest. The curator wanted to see more work. She wanted to discuss a group show. She named 3 other artists whose work would be alongside Maya's, and all 3 were names Maya recognized with the particular recognition of someone who has studied a field seriously for years. She read the email at the cafe, between orders, 3 times. She did not call him. She sat with it, her news, her moment, the thing she had earned in that studio in the north-facing light. She sat with the private satisfaction of it for a full day before she told anyone, because it was hers first, before it was anything else. That evening at Iyama's table, without planning to, she stopped at his corner table on her way past. He was there, a Sunday, his usual evening, the Dunjang Jigi already in front of him. He looked up. "I got a legitimate gallery inquiry," she said. "A real curator." She saw the pop-up on her own. She didn't know your name when she decided she wanted the work. He looked at her. His expression did not change in the ways that most people's expressions change when they receive good news on someone else's behalf. But something in it settled, the specific settling of a man whose calculation has proven correct and who feels, under the usual satisfaction of correctness, something else. Something warmer and less quantifiable and considerably more inconvenient. "I know," he said. She stared at him. "You know." She contacted the art space to get your details. The art space mentioned it to Mrs. Cho as a courtesy. "Mrs. Cho mentioned it to me." He paused. "I didn't intervene. I want that to be clear. I received information. I did not act on it." "That's a very careful distinction. It's an important one." She looked at him for a moment. This precise, contained, complicated man at his corner table in his mother's restaurant, with his hands around a bowl of soup he ate slowly every Sunday because it was the closest he could get to a conversation he could no longer have. She felt something she recognized as affection move through her, which was inconvenient and warm and completely beyond her current ability to manage efficiently. "The jigi is too salty," she said. His eyes, and this was the closest she had ever seen him come to actually smiling, did something. "Mrs. Cho," he said. "Mrs. Cho," she confirmed. She went back to work. She was smiling for the rest of the evening and she didn't bother to stop it. Mrs. Cho watched her from the host stand with the expression of someone who has known how a story ends for a very long time and has been waiting with great patience for the main characters to catch up. The gallery meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon in a clean white room with good bones and the particular quality of light that serious galleries cultivate. Not warm, not cold, just honest. The kind of light that shows work exactly as it is without editorial comment. The curator was a woman in her late 40s who looked at art the way Jisoo looked at documents, with complete attention and no performance of attention, which Maya had learned to recognize as the real thing. She had printed 3 of Maya's pieces from the pop-up photographs and pinned them to a board, and she talked about them with the specific language of someone who had been thinking about them since she first saw them, which meant she had been thinking about them for 3 weeks. Which meant the interest was genuine and had survived the cooling-off period that separated real responses from polite ones. They talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, the curator wanted 5 pieces for a group show opening in 8 weeks. The other 3 artists were being given the same timeline. The show had a name already, Unfinished, and the name made Maya's chest do something complicated because it was exactly right. It was the word for everything she'd been making in that studio, all the reaching hands and turned faces and bodies caught between one thing and the next. She walked out of the gallery into the afternoon city and stood on the pavement for a moment just breathing. 8 weeks. 5 pieces. A real gallery with real walls and a real opening and her name in the program next to artists whose work she had studied in school. She had earned this. She had earned it in that studio in the north-facing light, and she had earned it in the years before the studio, in the 11-minute sketches behind restaurants and on delivery receipts and in the last conscious moments before exhaustion took her. All of it had been building toward this. All 3 jobs and all the granola bars eaten over sinks and all the gallery windows she had looked through from the outside. She called Mrs. Cho. "I know," Mrs. Cho said, before Maya had finished the sentence. "How do you already know?" "Eat something to celebrate," Mrs. Cho said. "Come in tonight. I'll make sure the kitchen saves you something good." Maya laughed and said she'd be there and hung up and stood on the pavement for another moment, just letting herself feel the uncomplicated version of it before the complicated version arrived. Because she knew herself well enough to know the complicated version was coming. It arrived on the bus home in the form of a specific, clear-eyed understanding of what the next 8 weeks required. 5 pieces at gallery standard. She went to Iyama's table that evening not as a waitress. She had the evening off, but as herself. She sat at a table near the window, not the corner table, and Mrs. Cho brought her food she hadn't ordered and sat across from her for a few minutes in the way of someone who has earned the right to say things directly. "He came in on Tuesday," Mrs. Cho said. "Not Sunday. Tuesday." He comes in other days sometimes. He has come in on a day that is not Sunday exactly 4 times in the 11 years I have worked here, Mrs. Cho said. The first time was the day his mother's estate was settled. The second time was the day he made a business decision he told me later he regretted. The third time I don't know the reason for because he didn't say and I didn't ask. She paused. Tuesday was the 4th time. Maya looked at her food. What did he order? The jjigae. He always orders the jjigae. Mrs. Cho folded her hands on the table. He sat for 2 hours. He didn't work. He just Saturday. Another pause. In 20 years of knowing that man, I have never seen him sit somewhere for 2 hours without working. Maya said nothing. She was drawing on a napkin without meaning to, the automatic overflow of a brain processing something it didn't have direct language for yet. I'm not telling you what to do, Mrs. Cho said, with the tone of someone who is absolutely telling you what to do but has the grace to frame it as information. I'm telling you what I saw. She left Maya to her food and her napkin drawing and went back to the host stand with the satisfied expression of someone who has planted something and is confident in the soil. Jisoo arrived at the studio the following Sunday morning. He knocked his 2 precise knocks. Maya was already there, already working, 3 hours into a session that had started at 6 a.m. because she had woken up with an image fully formed in her head, and the only thing to do with that was get to the canvas before it faded. She was paint-stained to the elbow and wearing the oversized shirt she used as a smock, and her hair was up in the way it went up when she wasn't thinking about it, which was to say imperfectly, with a pencil through it. She said come in without turning around. He came in. She heard him stop and understood from the quality of the silence that he was looking at the new work. The pieces she had started for the gallery show, which were different again from the Women in Motion series, which had been different from everything before it. These were larger, more confrontational, figures that looked directly out of the canvas at the viewer without apology, without the turned faces and averted eyes of the earlier work. Women who were done being in motion and had decided to be still on their own terms. These are for the show, he said. 3 of them. I need 2 more. How long? 6 weeks if everything goes well. 8 if it doesn't. She heard him move further into the room. She finished the passage she was on. A hand, broad-stroked and certain, reaching toward the picture plane and stepped back. He was standing in front of the largest canvas, a 6-foot piece that she was most of the way through, a woman in full length standing so close to the picture plane she seemed about to step through it. The figure's face was direct and unguarded, and the brushwork was the most confident thing Maya had ever made, loose and fast and completely intentional, every mark knowing exactly why it was there. This is you, he said. It's a figure. It's you. He said it without looking away from the canvas. Not your face, but the stance. The way you stand when you've decided something. He turned to look at her. You stand like you're about to walk through a wall. She looked at the painting. Maybe. It's extraordinary, he said. He said it the way he said true things, without decoration, without the performance of a compliment. Just the statement of a fact he had assessed and confirmed. All of it. The whole series. He looked around the room at the pieces in progress, the finished canvases, the small plant study in the corner that he'd asked to take home weeks ago and hadn't yet because she kept forgetting to take it down and he kept not reminding her. A small mutual forgetting that had started to feel intentional on both sides. You're going to be extraordinary. I already am, she said. She said it without arrogance, the way you say things that you have finally, after a long time, decided to simply believe. Something in him shifted. The same shift she had seen in the studio weeks ago. The thing coming closer without his authorization. The thing he was no longer entirely sure he wanted to keep at distance. He was looking at her with the full focused attention he brought to the things he took seriously, which was everything. But this was different from how he looked at documents and different from how he looked at the work, and was in fact a look she hadn't seen him give anything else, which her artist's eye had catalogued and her less professional self was currently choosing not to directly address. The deadline, he said. He put his hand in his pocket. No watch. I came to tell you I'm extending it. However long the show requires. I know. I told you that already? You told me last month. When you came and didn't check your watch. She picked up a clean brush. I noticed. He looked at her for a moment. You notice everything. Occupational habit. Maya. Her name in his mouth had a quality to it she had been aware of for some time without examining directly, the way you are aware of a light in a room without looking at the source. He said her name like it meant something specific to him, like it was a word he had turned over enough times to know its weight. I need to tell you something that I'm uncertain how to say, which is an unusual position for me. She set the brush down. She turned to face him fully. Then just say it the way you say everything else. Without decoration. He looked at her. He was very still. I came on Tuesday, he said. Not Sunday. I came because I needed to be in the room where I could think clearly, and the room where I think most clearly is the room my mother built, and I needed to think clearly about you. About what this is. A pause. I don't have language for what this is. I have language for everything. I've built an entire operation on the precise use of language, and I don't have the words for this particular thing. The studio was very quiet. Outside the windows the city moved through its ordinary Sunday morning, and in here the light was clean and even and everything was paint and honest surfaces. That's not actually true, Maya said. Her voice was steady in the way it got steady when she was feeling something large. You have the words. You're just not accustomed to saying them in a context where you don't control the outcome. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. I'm not. Say them anyway. Another silence. He looked at the large canvas, the woman about to walk through the wall. Then he looked at Maya. I don't want to manage this, he said. I've managed everything in my life. Every variable, every risk, every relationship. I don't want to do that with you. I want to. He stopped. Started again. I want to be in the room. Whatever room you're in. Not to protect it or control it or make it more efficient. Just to be there. Maya looked at him. She thought about the Tuesday he'd sat for 2 hours without working. She thought about the key in her pocket and the north-facing light and the plant on the windowsill that neither of them touched. She thought about his mother, who had said that if you pay for someone's dream it becomes your dream, and about how he had finally understood what that meant. You're already in the room, she said. You've been in the room for a while. I know, he said. I just wanted to say it out loud. She picked up her brush. Then it said. She looked at him. Now either go get breakfast and come back or stay and be quiet. I'm working. The possibility of a smile, the one that never quite got all the way there, came closer than it ever had before. I'll stay, he said. Then sit somewhere that isn't blocking the light. He sat on the paint-splattered workbench. He folded his hands. He was very still, the Sunday stillness that she had painted twice already and was going to paint again, the stillness of a man who had spent his entire adult life in motion and had found, improbably, the one room where stopping felt like arriving rather than losing. She painted. He watched. The north-facing light moved slowly across the concrete floor. It was, she thought, the most efficient use of a Sunday morning she had ever witnessed. The 6 weeks that followed had the quality of a life being rearranged from the inside out. Not dramatically, not with the sudden violent reorganization of a crisis, but with the quiet inevitability of things finding the configuration they were always going to find once the obstacles were cleared. He came to the studio most mornings. Sometimes he worked. Laptop, documents, the occasional phone call he stepped outside to take, always returning with the slightly compressed expression of a man who has just been reminded that the world he runs requires maintenance. Sometimes he just sat. He brought food from Yama's table with a regularity that meant Maya ate properly for the first time in years. Real meals at actual intervals, a development that her body registered with the same full-system relief as that first bowl of kimchi jjigae on her first night at the restaurant. He learned her process, not because she taught him but because he watched with the focused attention he brought to everything, and understanding things was what he did. He learned that she needed silence in the first hour and could tolerate noise after that. He learned that when she went quiet mid-work it meant she was solving something and should not be interrupted. He learned that she talked to the canvases when she was frustrated with them, a habit she had never broken from art school, and he never commented on this, which she appreciated deeply. She learned him too. She learned that the watch came off when he was somewhere he'd chosen freely and went back on when duty reasserted itself, and that she had started to read his wrists the way other people read faces. She learned that he had opinions about color that he expressed only when asked and that the opinions, when they came, were unexpectedly precise and almost always right. She learned that he kept a photograph in his wallet that he never showed anyone, and she didn't ask about it, and one morning he put it on the workbench beside his coffee without saying anything, and it was his mother, young, standing in front of a restaurant space that was not yet Yama's table, smiling with the specific smile of someone who knows they are about to build something. Maya looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at Jisoo. Then she went back to work without saying anything, because some things didn't need words and she understood that he knew she understood. The fifth and final piece for the gallery show came to her 3 days before the deadline in the way that the best things came. Not as an idea she'd been working toward, but as something that arrived fully formed and simply needed to be made. She painted it in one session, 14 hours, stopping only to eat the food he brought her and to walk around the studio when her back protested. He stayed the whole time. He didn't sleep. He sat on the workbench and worked through the night, and when she finally stepped back from the finished canvas at 4 in the morning, they were both quiet for a long time. The painting was of 2 people in a room. A studio, recognizable. A woman at a canvas, her back to the viewer, her hand raised mid-stroke. And in the background, on a workbench in the even north-facing light, a man sitting very still, watching her work, his hands folded and his face carrying the expression of someone who has found, against all previous projections, exactly where they are supposed to be. "That's us," he said. "Yes. You painted us." "I paint what's true," she said. She was exhausted and paint-covered and more awake than she'd felt in years. "That's what's true." He looked at the painting for a long time. Then he looked at her. "Is it for the show?" She considered it. "No," she said. "This one stays." The opening night of Unfinished fell on a Friday in the 3rd week of November, when the city had committed fully to winter and the gallery windows threw warm light out onto a cold street in a way that made the building look like something worth entering. Maya arrived 40 minutes early because she was constitutionally incapable of being anywhere on time when it mattered, which is to say she was always early to the things that frightened her, and she was frightened by this in the specific way she was frightened by things she wanted badly. She walked through the gallery alone before anyone else arrived, looking at her 5 pieces on the white walls with the slightly dissociated feeling of someone seeing their own interior life made external and public. The works were hung well. The curator had an instinct for spacing and sequence that honored the conversation between pieces, and they looked, in this honest gallery light, like exactly what they were. The best things she had ever made. The truest things. She stood in front of the largest piece for a long time. The woman about to walk through the wall. She had painted it 6 weeks ago in a state of focused certainty that she had not questioned in the making and did not question now. It was right. All 5 pieces were right. She had earned every inch of wall space they occupied, and she let herself feel that without qualification for exactly as long as it took the first guests to begin arriving. And then she put on the face she wore in public, warm, present, the face of someone who could discuss her work without falling into it, and went to meet them. The show filled up in the way good shows filled up, steadily and with purpose, people arriving because they actually wanted to be there rather than because attendance was obligatory. The other 3 artists were generous and interesting, and the conversations moved between the works naturally, viewers carrying threads from one piece to another the way you carry a feeling through rooms. Maya talked about her series with the curator, with strangers, with a woman who stood in front of the reaching hand piece for so long that Maya went over, and they ended up talking for 20 minutes about the specific grief of wanting things you can't yet reach and the specific courage of reaching anyway. She sold 2 pieces before the evening was an hour old. Real sales to people she had never met, who did not know anyone she knew, who simply wanted the work because the work had found something in them that needed finding. She stood after the second sale with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking and felt the clean, uncomplicated version of that fact move through her like a key turning in a lock. She did not see him come in. She was across the room, deep in a conversation about color temperature, when she felt the atmosphere of the gallery make its subtle adjustment. Not the dramatic shift of Iyama's table, but something quieter, the way a room's quality of attention changes when someone with a great deal of contained presence enters it. She looked up without knowing she was going to. He was standing just inside the entrance in a dark suit. No overcoat tonight, and he was alone. No second in command, no associates, no managed perimeter. Just him, in a room full of her work, looking at the first piece nearest the door with the full focused attention he brought to things he intended to understand completely. He didn't look for her immediately. He moved through the show the way he did everything, deliberately, without rushing, giving each piece the consideration it warranted. She watched him from across the room and felt something she recognized as the specific vulnerability of having made things that told the truth about yourself and then having someone you cared about look at them directly. There was nowhere to hide in honest work. She had painted herself into every canvas, and he was reading all of it, and there was nothing to do but let him read. He got to the woman about to walk through the wall piece and stopped. He stood in front of it for a long time, longer than he'd stood in front of anything else. She couldn't see his expression from where she was standing. She watched his shoulders, his hands, the quality of his stillness, which she had learned to read the way other people read faces. He was moved. She could tell from across the room. He was moved, and he was managing it with the discipline of a man who had trained himself never to be visibly undone. But she knew the difference by now between composure and control, and what she was seeing was control working very hard. She excused herself from the conversation she was in and crossed the room. She came to stand beside him in front of the painting. Not behind him, not at a socially calibrated distance, but beside him, close enough that their arms almost touched, the way you stand beside someone when you are done performing distance. They looked at the painting together for a moment without speaking. "You walked through the wall," he said finally. "I did. When did you decide to?" She thought about it honestly. "Probably around the time you sat in the studio for 2 hours on a Tuesday without doing any work," she said. "I knew then that you were in as much trouble as I was." He was quiet. Outside the gallery windows, the city moved through its cold Friday night. Inside, people moved around them and the light was warm and her work was on the walls and he was standing beside her without a watch and without a strategy and without any of the architecture of control he usually moved through the world inside of. "I brought you something," he said. "You didn't have to bring anything. I told you that. I know you told me that." He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. He held it out the way he'd held out the studio key, flat palm, no pressure, the offering of something without the demand of a particular response. "Open it later. Not here." She took it. "Is this another deed to something?" "Open it later," he said again. She put it in her bag. She looked at him. "Are you going to tell me what it is?" "No." "Are you going to stand here looking at my painting all night?" "I was planning to look at all of them," he said. "In order. With appropriate attention." He looked at her. "Is that acceptable? The show runs for 3 weeks. You have time. I want to look tonight." A pause. "I want to look tonight with you, if you're not otherwise occupied." She looked at the room full of people and conversations and her work on the walls and the wine she still hadn't drunk and the curator who would want her for photographs later and all the legitimate, important obligations of the evening she was standing in. "I'm occupied," she said, "but not otherwise." They moved through the show together, slowly, pausing in front of each piece. She talked about the work, not the way she talked about it with the public, the prepared accessible version, but the real version, the underneath version, what she had been thinking and feeling and trying to understand when she made each thing. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to rely on about him. He asked questions only when he had them, and the questions were always good, the questions of someone who had been paying full attention. In front of the third piece, the woman with the hands holding something that wasn't there, he said, "What was she holding?" "I don't know," Maya said. "I painted the absence rather than the thing. I thought the absence was more honest." "What does that mean?" "It means whatever you were carrying before you understood what it was. The weight of something you couldn't name yet." She looked at the painting. "I painted it a week after I found out who you were. I don't think that's a coincidence." He looked at the painting for a long time. "No," he said. "I don't think so either." The evening moved through its stages, the speeches, the photographs, the gradual warm dissolution of a good opening into the smaller, more honest conversations that happened when the formal part was over and people were just people in a room with art they'd been affected by. Maya sold a third piece to a collector the curator introduced her to, a real collector with a real eye who talked about the work with the precision of someone who knew what they were looking at. By 9 o'clock, the crowd had thinned to the people who didn't want to leave, which was the best sign a show could give. Maya found herself standing near the door with a genuine tiredness that was different from the tiredness of 3 jobs. This was the tiredness of having poured something real out into the world and having the world receive it, the specific pleasant depletion of a thing fully done. He found her there. "Come outside for a minute," he said. They stood on the pavement in front of the gallery in the cold November night, the warm light of her show behind them through the glass, the city doing its ordinary indifferent city things around them. She could see her paintings through the window. She could see people still standing in front of them. "Open the envelope," he said. She opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a legal filing she recognized the structure of immediately. She had looked at enough documents in the past months to read the language. The Yama's Table building, transferred into a permanent protective trust. The restaurant staff listed as beneficiaries. Structured to operate independently in perpetuity with a board that included Mrs. Cho. She read it twice. "You let it go," she said. "I let it be what she built it to be," he said. "Which is something that belongs to everyone who loves it, not just to me." He was looking at the gallery window, at her work visible through the glass. "I held on to it like holding on was the same as honoring her. Mrs. Cho told me once that she used to wink about the salty jjigae. She knew. She was in on the joke. She wasn't a memory I needed to preserve behind glass. She was a person who laughed at her own cooking and built chairs out of market finds and left a plant on a windowsill because she wanted something living in the room." He paused. "She would have wanted the restaurant to be alive. Not preserved. Alive." Maya folded the first document carefully and looked at the second. It was a property deed. A gallery space, small, in a neighborhood she knew well, the kind of block that had good bones and genuine light and the particular character of a place that had been waiting for the right use. The deed was in her name. Clean title. No encumbrances. No conditions written or implied. Just her name on a building that could be the thing she had been sketching in her head for years. She stood on the pavement for a moment, not speaking. "It's yours," he said. "Not mine with your name on it. Not a resource I'm allocating. Yours. I won't have a key. I won't have a say in how it runs or what goes in it or who you show. If you call me, I'll come. If you don't, it's still yours. Jisoo." "I spent my whole life," he said, and his voice had the quality it got when he was saying something he had prepared but was saying for real anyway, making sure every second produced a return. Every resource allocated to a purpose. Every relationship structured around a function. He looked at her. The gallery light was behind her and the city was cold and he was standing on a pavement without his watch and without his armor and she could see him. The actual him, the Sunday him, the him that only existed in rooms where he felt safe enough to be still. "Watching you work is the only time I have ever been genuinely happy to waste time. Not productive time. Not strategic time. Just time. Just being in the room while you make something real." He paused. "I don't want to manage this. I don't want to optimize it or protect it or run it like an operation. I just want to be in your rooms. Whatever rooms you're in. For as long as you'll have me in them." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about a woman who had built a restaurant from 3 jobs and mismatched chairs and a plant she brought from home because she wanted something living in the room. She thought about the son who had kept everything exactly as she left it and was only now, finally, learning to let the living thing keep growing instead of preserving it under glass. She thought about herself. 26 years old, paint-stained hands, gallery deed in her fingers, 3 jobs behind her and a whole unfinished life ahead. And she thought about how the most important things she had ever made had been made in the space between survival and something better, in the room where she had finally, for the first time, been still long enough to find out what she was actually capable of. "You're already in my rooms," she said. "You've been in them for a while." "I know," he said. "I wanted to say it out loud. On a pavement. In the cold. Without a strategy. How does that feel?" He considered it with the seriousness he brought to all genuine questions. "Inefficient," he said. "And entirely necessary." She laughed, the real one, the unguarded one, and he watched her laugh with the expression she had been painting for months without fully naming, the expression of a man who has found the one thing in his life that he has absolutely no interest in making more efficient and is, for the first time, completely at peace with that. She took his hand. Not dramatically. Just took it the way you take the hand of someone you have decided to stop performing distance from. His hand was warm and he held hers with the careful certainty of someone who has been trusted with something they intend to deserve. They stood there for a moment on the cold pavement with the gallery light behind them and the city moving around them and her work visible through the glass. The reaching hands and the turned faces and the woman about to walk through the wall and all the true and unfinished things she had made in the best 6 months of her life. Then she said, "Come back inside. There's a piece you haven't seen yet." "Which one?" "The corner of the room. Small. Easy to miss." She pulled him gently toward the door. "It's the first thing I painted when I understood what I was actually doing here." They went back inside. He followed her to the corner of the gallery where a small canvas hung. 8 by 10, almost modest beside the larger works around it. The plant from Yama's table. The dark green leaves, the ceramic pot, the quality of late afternoon light coming through a specific window. Painted from memory in a quiet hour, by someone who had been paying attention to the things other people walked past. Beside it, a small card in her handwriting. Not for sale. He stood in front of it for a long time. She stood beside him. She would have liked this, he said finally. I know, Maya said. Mrs. Cho told me. He looked at the painting of his mother's plant in Maya's gallery, and she watched him let something go. Not his grief, which was his and permanent and not something that needed to be released so much as carried differently, but the part that had been holding everything still to keep from losing her further. The part that had frozen the restaurant and the chairs and the menus in amber, mistaking preservation for love. Love, she had come to understand, in the making of 5 gallery pieces and 1 small plant study and a painting of 2 people in a studio that would hang in no gallery because it was theirs, was not the stopping of time. It was the willingness to keep moving through it with someone. To let the things you love keep growing even after you can no longer tend them yourself. To leave a plant on a windowsill not as a monument but as an instruction. Keep something living in the room. He reached over without looking away from the painting and took her hand again. She let him. Outside the gallery, the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent and loud and full of people running from one place to the next with delivery bags and color-coded schedules and dreams they visited through closed windows. Inside, the light was warm. The work was on the walls. Something was beginning. And in the corner of a small gallery, on a Friday night in November, a plant painted from memory by a woman who had finally stopped surviving long enough to start living hung on a white wall with a card that said not for sale, which was true of the painting, and also, she was beginning to understand, true of certain other things she had recently decided to keep. This story is about more than a love that found its way through impossible odds. It carries within it several quiet, important truths worth sitting with after the last word. The first is this: survival mode is not a personality. Maya spent 2 years running so hard she forgot she was also an artist, a dreamer, a person who deserved to stop and eat a full meal. The exhaustion of trying to outwork your circumstances is real, and it is also a trap, because the dream doesn't disappear while you're surviving, but your access to it does. If you are in the middle of that right now, this story was written for you. You are not behind. You are building. The second truth is about the cost of gifts given without consent. Jisoo loved with the only tools he had, efficiency, resources, removal of obstacles, and discovered that love applied like a business strategy is still control, regardless of the intention behind it. The things we do for people without asking them first, however well-meant, can take something from them even as they give something. Ask. Always ask. The third truth belongs to Jisoo and his mother's restaurant. Preservation is not the same as love. We sometimes hold the people we've lost so tightly in amber that we forget they were living things. Messy, laughing, aware of their own salty jiggy and winking about it. Honoring someone does not mean stopping time. It means letting what they built keep growing. And the last truth, the one the plant on the windowsill has been holding all along. Keep something living in the room. In your home, in your work, in your relationships. Something that requires tending. Something that grows toward the light without being asked to. Something that reminds you every day that the point was never to arrive. The point was always to keep becoming. Thank you for staying until the last word. Thank you for giving this story your time, which is the most finite and generous thing you have. If something in Maya's reaching hands or Jisoo's careful stillness found something in you that needed finding, that was always the whole point. Stories are just paintings made of words. True things, unfinished, reaching toward whoever is willing to look. Take care of your dream, eat something, and never ever move the plant.